What's up everyone, this is White Pointer, and it's time to dive into some video game history again. A lot of gamers, especially those who owned a SNES, will no doubt be aware of what Secret of Mana was and have fond memories of playing it. It's recently enjoyed releases on Virtual Console, mobile platforms, and most recently on a Switch as well, giving a new generation of gamers the chance to enjoy it too. What you may not know, however, is that Secret of Mana is actually the second game in a series known as Seiken Densetsu in Japan. This translates to Legend of the Sacred Sword, or Holy Sword Legend in English. In this video, with the remake of Trials of Mana, or Seiken Densetsu 3, due out in April 2020, I want to investigate why this series was renamed for the English localizations. This history is a little bit convoluted, so hang in there. Let's get into it. Seiken Densetsu actually started life as a spin-off game from the Final Fantasy series, with a game titled Final Fantasy Adventure for the Game Boy in 1991. It was known in Japan as Seiken Densetsu Final Fantasy Gaiden. Gaiden means side story, and in PAL regions as Mystic Quest. Now, I'll just pause for a moment to clarify that it's important not to confuse this game with Final Fantasy Mystic Quest on the SNES, which was known as Final Fantasy USA Mystic Quest when it was released in Japan, and Mystic Quest Legend in PAL countries. That's a completely different game, and actually has more in common with the Saga series than it does Final Fantasy, but that's a topic for another time. Just keep in mind that they are not the same game, and we are only focusing on the Game Boy title here. At some point following the release of Final Fantasy Adventure, Squaresoft decided that it was different enough to turn it into its own franchise. The game notably diverged from Final Fantasy by featuring battles that happened in real time, as opposed to the turn-based systems Final Fantasy used, and the subgenre will go on to be more commonly known as Action RPG. According to website The Seikens, the Seiken Densetsu name was actually intended to be used much earlier on a Famicom Disk System game titled Seiken Densetsu The Emergence of Excalibur, but this game was ultimately cancelled, and the moniker was instead utilised for the Japanese version of Final Fantasy Adventure. Following the release of Seiken Densetsu Final Fantasy Gaiden, or Final Fantasy Adventure, or Mystic Quest, depending on where you lived, when the SNES sequel Seiken Densetsu 2 was localized into English in 1993, it was renamed to Secret of Mana. Already we are in confusing name change territory here. Then came Seiken Densetsu 3 in 1995, arguably the best game in the series, but sadly this never saw an official release outside Japan until 2019, when it was finally localized and released as part of the Collection of Mana compilation package for Nintendo Switch, where it was given the English title of Trials of Mana. Although never officially releasing outside Japan on the SNES, the game did receive an unofficial fan translation, which was the only way you could play it in English for a very long time. As I mentioned at the beginning of the video, not only has the original game finally been localized, we were actually receiving a complete modern remake of it too, which looks really interesting. The fourth game in the series, titled Seiken Densetsu Legend of Mana in Japan, was released internationally as Legend of Mana in 1999. From there, the original Final Fantasy Adventure was remade in 2003 and retitled at the same time to Sword of Mana. It was remade again in 2016 for mobile platforms and renamed yet again to Adventures of Mana. We aren't done though. Wait, there's more. Following the original releases, Squaresoft released a sub-series known as World of Mana. This included Children of Mana, Seiken Densetsu DS Children of Mana, Dawn of Mana, Seiken Densetsu 4, even though it was the 8th game in the series by that point, Heroes of Mana, Seiken Densetsu Heroes of Mana, and finally Friends of Mana, Seiken Densetsu Firenzu Obu Mana. There's even been a couple of smaller mobile games released, but we'll stop there. Everyone still with me after all that? Yes? Good? Okay, let's keep going. The actual official reasoning for the renaming remains a mystery though, as nobody from Squaresoft/Square Enix has ever explained the title changes. I even tried to contact some of the people that worked on the games, and the localizations in particular, but they didn't respond to any of my queries. The Japanese titles would indicate that the sword, the titular sacred or holy blade, is the central plot device, but this actually isn't the case. Many games in the series centre around the need to rescue mana elemental spirits on the way to prevent the Tree of Mana, that usually is the life force of the world, from being destroyed or corrupted by the bad guys. Having said that, the RPG Fanatic show stipulated the theory that the original title changes happened due to Nintendo of America's strict quality guidelines at the time, which forced many games to censor religious allusions to avoid potentially causing offence. Therefore, the reference to a holy sword may have been the crux of the problem, so the games were renamed in the English localizations to shift the focus more onto the mana and less onto the sword for this reason. This theory does make sense. When you look at other titles that received renames and even game modifications during this period, including The Legend of Zelda: A Link to the Past, for exactly this reason. However, the sword itself still plays an important role, as is usually the case that it's the only weapon that can defeat the final boss and/or restore the Tree of Mana. As a kind of bonus fact for those playing at home, the game Secret of Evermore, despite its similar title and its very similar gameplay and battle system, is not part of the Mana series at all. It was developed by a separate team at Squaresoft USA using their own tech, and was never officially released in Japan. According to an old interview with lead programmer Brian Fedor on the now defunct SuperNES.com, they were to make an American flavoured Secret of Mana-like game. So it's inspired by the Mana games, but was otherwise completely unconnected. Secret of Evermore receives some unfair criticism at times, because it's a common misconception that international gamers received it instead of Seiken Densetsu 3, which we now know as Trials of Mana. This isn't the case at all. We were always going to get Secret of Evermore, irrespective of what happened with Seiken Densetsu 3, even if the latter had never been made. So now you might be asking, well, if that wasn't the reason, then why didn't we get Trials of Mana on the Super Nintendo? Technical issues. What exactly that means, it's never been elaborated on, but it's commonly believed that the localization would have been far too expensive. A lot of content in the game itself would have needed altering, in addition to the huge volume of text that required translating. And due to the sheer size of the game, it would have needed non-standard cartridges that would have increased costs further. The game also had a few bugs that Nintendo of America may have had problems with, so it would have cost even more money to fix those. Plus, the game was released right at the end of the Super Nintendo's lifespan, and the new generation of consoles were being ushered in, so they opted not to release it in the West, as they probably figured it wouldn't be profitable. But at least we have it now. Better late than never. Do you have any ideas about video game history that you'd like me to cover? Drop me some comments below, and I'll do my best to tackle anything that's interesting. Give me a thumbs up if you liked the video too. Don't forget to subscribe to stay up to date with my content. Thanks for watching!